Welcome to chess, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the greatest show on earth. Nah, I'm playing. You know, I'm just a regular guy. I'm just chilling, you know, just doing my thing over here. Bringing you guys these games. So I decided that I was going to step away from Wesley So for this game. Because unfortunately, there were only 2 games this round that didn't feature, like, you know, kind of like the 10 to 15 move draw. You know, I don't want to just, I mean, because I'm just going to end up showing those. And, I mean, it's stuff that people have already seen. I don't think anybody wants to see that. So, like I said, I stepped away and I went ahead and grabbed a Levon Aronian versus Magnus Carlsen game. Always classic battles between the 2 of these guys. But let me see. For all of my people in the Philippines, Magandang umaga, kamusta na? Definitely way early in the morning, so I'm going to shout out to y'all. Appreciate you guys very much for stopping by. For anybody that's coming from Armenia who does speak Armenian, Vok to you, I'm pretty sure. Yes, that's correct. Vok and merci for coming by and taking a look at my video. For anybody that's coming from Norway who does speak Norwegian, I will say God Morgan to you. Tak for coming by and taking a look at my video. Appreciate it very much. And of course, I have the rest of the Philippines languages for you at the end of the video. I'm trying to work on getting them in order. But like I said, I do have Levon Aronian versus Magnus Carlsen. This is also taken from round 10. So if you guys are ready to go, let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so we got D4, D5, knight comes to F3, knight to F6, bishop to F4. And this is the London system. You guys are probably pretty familiar with it, I think. So we got C5, we got E3, knight comes to C6, we got knight B to D2, pawn takes D4, pawn takes D4, we got queen to B6. Now, usually these queen to B6 or queen to B3s can be very annoying. But, you know, in the case of these guys, it doesn't really too much phase them. And also you have knight to B3, which pretty much solves all of your problems. You know, you don't have any pawn to grab, and you also are double, triple defending your D4 pawn. So you are good to go now. We see bishop to G4. So, you know, black is doing, you know, some pretty quick developing, so that's good. We got A4. And we have A6, we got A5, just knocking that queen away. So the queen retreats back to D8. We have H3, we have bishop to H5, and we have G4. Now, I'm gonna go another couple of moves, but there's a couple of points that I wanna talk about. So we got bishop to G6, we got knight to E5, we have knight to D7. So, okay. The few things that I want to mention about the particular situation is Levon Aronian and Magnus Carlsen are clearly some of the top players in the world in chess. And they are very, very familiar with each other. But the caution that I wanted to give to people is fundamentally, this is not a good position to have from a basic standpoint. Because a couple of things that I want to mention. First, Levon Aronian has pushed a bunch of pawns everywhere on the side of the board. So when you really think about it, his king is not really going to be safe castling in either direction. You want to be really careful when you're pushing a lot of pawns like this in the beginning of the game. Like I said, these guys are the best in, the best in the world. So they have a lot of intuition. They have a lot of positional understanding and just complete knowledge of the game. So they usually can play these types of ways and get away with it. But, you know, it doesn't work for everybody. So just in general, you do want to stick to opening principles. You don't want to touch pieces multiple times unless you have a good reason to do so. And be very careful keeping your king in the center of the board. And I'll mention something else coming up pretty soon. Knight takes on G6, pawn takes on G6. So the position for white is actually pretty good. We have C3, E6, bishop comes to D3. We have knight to F6, queen comes to F3, and we have bishop to D6. One of the key features that I want you guys to be paying attention to in this position is, yes, the king is stuck in the center of the board, but it is a fairly closed position, and that is something you really have to understand when you do choose to not castle, or you make a lot of movements that aren't, you know, speedy development and castling, stuff like that. Because of the fact that it is a somewhat closed position, it is not as dangerous for you to be in the center of the board. Now, of course, if we remove pretty much these 3 pawns here, and the position is crazy open, and there's queens on the board, yeah, you could be in some trouble. So be very careful, like I said. We have king to F1, bishop takes on F4, queen takes on F4, sorry. We have knight to D7, we got king to G2, we have G5, queen comes to G3. So, you know, the position is getting a little bit more balanced. It's looking more like a general position. But you know, neither side has castle. But you know, like I said, I mean, for it to be a pretty close position, you're still doing pretty good. The rook comes to c8. We have rook h to e1. Queen comes to c7. We got knight to d2. Queen takes on g3. Pawn takes on g3. So as you guys can see, we have queens traded. So a lot of the danger associated with being in the center of the board for, you know, for each of these kings are pretty much gone. So, you know, you can kind of breathe a sigh of relief. But like I said, you know, these guys are such highly level players, and they have such high chess understanding, you know, that they can get away with it a little bit easier than your average folk like me. Anyway, so we got king to e7. We got knight coming to f3. We got f6. We have bishop to f5, taking full advantage of the fact that this king is in the center and this pawn is pinned. We have knight back to f8. And then we see c4. So we're trying to pawn break. We're trying to open the position up. We're hoping to get this move in, and it's just going to put like the utmost pressure on this pawn. But unfortunately, this move does allow a nice sequence of moves for black to play, and it gives black a slight advantage. If we back up here, I'm wanting you guys to stop the video, pause the video, and see if you can find a really, really good move for white. And there is a certain type of concept behind the reasoning for this move. And I will get into that. And I'm curious how many people are actually going to get this answer correct. So go ahead and pause it and see if you can find this beautiful move. Okay, cool. So the concept that's behind the move that I'm going to show you guys is a space. Some of you guys who have done some study in chess have understood, you know, there's different concepts. You know, there's time, there's space, there's development, you know, stuff like that. Like those are just certain, you know, elements in the game of chess and stuff like that. So, you know, the space concept is very real. You know, you can have an advantage in space. That's definitely a lot of the times going to give you a good situation. What I want to talk to you guys about right now is the fact that right now you see white has, you know, basically if we're talking about, you know, the control of certain squares and stuff like that in black's position, we're looking at these kind of squares here because these are pawns and knights and stuff are, you know, defending these squares, attacking them. And so is the rook as well. And so for black, it's a little bit less, but we do have more squares into, you know, white's position, not as much. But there is a way to basically greatly decrease black's hold on white's position and increase white's. The move is actually h4. Now, this also liberates your structure because you did have a damaged structure a little bit here. So after h4, we would see pawn take h4, pawn take h4. And as you can see, the space advantage has greatly increased for white. So now you have all of these squares, with an advantage, and you have decreased black's hold on your position. It can get pretty advanced as far as space is concerned. It's not always relevant. It's not like because you just have space, you're always going to be better, but it's just definitely something to consider when you're evaluating a chess position. Getting back to what we saw in the game, we did see c4. And like I said, this unfortunately allows a nice combination for Carlsen to, you know, get his way, like, severely back in the game. So the king comes to f7. So what he did is he unpinned his king. We have pawn takes d5. Pawn takes f5, a nice little in-between move. We got pawn taking c6, pawn taking f4, another in-between move. Or pawn taking g4, sorry. And then pawn takes g4, and then rook takes c6. And as you guys can see, compared to the position that we had before with the beautiful h4 move, you have a damaged structure, you have an isolated pawn, you have a much harder position to play as white. As opposed to, you know, what we saw before. So it's just little stuff like that, you know, makes a big difference in the game. So we see rook a to c1. We got knight coming to g6. We have d5. You do have a passed pawn on the d file, so you do want to try to push that as much as possible. So that is something that white definitely has going for him. We see rook c to c8. We got knight to d4. We have rook h to d8. We have knight to e6. A beautiful outpost square for white. We see rook to e8. We have b4. Just making sure that we try to, you know, take care of this pawn over here, so it's not lonely. We got knight to e5. And then we have a really nice tactic in this position, and it is knight takes g5. You definitely do not want to capture this. because you're going to be playing, you're going to be playing defense for a while because you're going to see rook taking c8. You're going to see rook taking c8, rook taking e5, rook to c4, b5, rook to a4, rook to f5 with check, king to g6, and then you're going to see the king start to come in the game. And you're not too much worried about this pawn because this pawn is your super strength, and you're getting your king. You can see that your king is in a much better position than your opponent's king. So going back to what we had in the game, like I said, we had knight takes g5, and Magnus Carlsen just sidesteps that and moves the king to e7. So we see knight back to e6. As you can see, this knight on e6 is just killer. It's doing some really, really good jobs right there. So g5 comes. We see knight to c5, rook e to d8. We have rook c to d1, king to f7, rook to d4. We see rook to c7, rook to e2. And this is kind of like a waiting move, but it's putting black in a zugzwang. You don't really have a lot of options as black, and you really have to stop the pawn. So you see rook to d6. You have knight down to e4, attacking the rook. And this is it's really kind of crazy because the rook d goes back to d7, and then we have knight takes g5 again. It's insane that you have the same tactic 2 times in the same game. It's just crazy. So like you don't want to take there because you're just going to be dropping the piece. And, you're just going to be, it's just going to be too sad for you. You're going to be down way too many pawns. Even though the fact that these are double pawns, it's not going to matter. So we see king down to g6. Knight comes to f3. And you really, really have to trade here. Knight takes f3, king takes f3. Because if you don't, after knight to f3, if you try to retreat and just preserve your piece, you're going to see knight to h4 with check. King's going to come to g5, and then you see king to h3. And as you can see, this king it doesn't have very much breathing room. So we don't want to get into that spot. So we see king taking f3. Rook comes down to c1. We see d6. We got rook to c6, and we have the nice rook to e7. And you really don't have a lot you can do here. We see rook d takes d6 in the game. Rook takes d6, rook takes d6. If you were to try to if you were to take here, thinking that you're in time to stop the pawn, if you took on e7 here, then we would see pawn taking e7, king to f7, rook to e4, king goes to e8, king to f4, rook to d6. You kind of have to shift back and forth. You have king to f5, rook to c6, rook to e6, pretty much forcing the trade. The king would take on e6, and then you literally have the black king stalemated. And you're going to be able to push your pawn home. This is just one of the moves. I mean, you can also make this move over here, but that's going to be checkmating faster. And you don't take because you want to allow your opponent the ability to move. You do not want to stalemate. We got f4, g6, f3, g7, and then after f2, we're going to see g8 equals queens, and that's mate. So like I said, rook taking d6, rook taking d6. The rook took on b7. We saw rook to d3 with check. The king came to e4, rook took g3, king to d5, rook taking g4. We saw king to c5. Magnus Carlsen thought for a minute, and it is in this position that he did resign the game. They're to show you a sample variation of what could happen after this point is f5, rook to a7, rook taking f4, sorry, rook taking a6 with check. King to g5. If you're trying to go in the direction of your pawn, it's suggested that you go up because you do want to prevent the rook from coming to this square. But if you do think that you want to kind of go with your pawn, you see rook to a8, f3, rook to g8 with check, king to f4, and not taking on g4, but checking on f8. You're going to be giving up the rook for the pawn. The king goes to e3. You see a6, f2. You see a7. And as you guys can see, there is no way for this rook to really get over and try to defend against this square. So that is all she wrote. And that is just a sample variation of how it would end up. Now, for all of my people in the Philippines, I'm working on getting this in order. So that way I just have it memorized in the correct order. So, you got to bear with me. But I have my Ayon Buntog. I have Mayad Na Agahan. I have Ninebag Na Bigat, Masantos Yakabosan, and there's one I just recently got. It is Marhe Na Aga. I got Buenos Dias. I got Maayong Aga. And then I have the new one I just got today, Mapia na Uma. And then I have Mabuting Pagbati. Yes, Mabuting Pagbati. Yes, great. Okay, so for all of my people and everywhere else, merci, tac. Appreciate it very much for coming by and taking a look at my video. And I will see you guys tomorrow. See what we have cracking mañana. But I appreciate it very much, and I'll see you guys next time. All right.